For a lot of us this weekend, it's win and get into the fantasy playoffs. So let's break it down. If you have any questions, drop them in the comments. Let's get into it. Starting here at the quarterback position with Mr. Unlimited, Russell Wilson, as he's coming off of a very solid 19 to 20 point game last week, at least for fantasy. And even though they lost, this has been a completely different offense since the midseason mark. Rush is playing the Los Angeles Chargers defense this weekend. Of course, they don't defend anybody but themselves, but Rush should be able to exploit this defense through the air that has allowed the third most fantasy points to quarterbacks this season. But even if he can't, he's had some success on the ground. It kind of looks like prime Russell Wilson, as in back-to-back weeks, he has had a rushing touchdown. So to me, I think it's a no-brainer. Unless you have an elite option like Jalen Hurts, Josh Allen, quarterbacks of that tier, I would start Mr. Unlimited this weekend in a win and get in situation. But how about a young gun in Jordan Love? And Jordan Love is playing like the quarterback I thought he would coming out of Utah State, as these last 3 weeks have been electric. And this week, he plays a very dynamic New York Giants team in defense. But this is a defense that is 21st against the quarterback position, and they do generate some pressure, which we know the Green Bay offensive line is not the greatest, so that could cause some issues. However, it's hard to go against this offense with all the young weapons that they have and how great they've looked, especially as of late the last month or so. So I would trust Jordan Love this weekend, as, again, he's averaging 24 points over the last 3 weeks. Even if he dips down to 20, 18 points, that's still a very solid week in my opinion for a guy like Jordan Love, and it should be enough to get you into the fantasy playoffs. But how about some quarterbacks that we got to sit this weekend? We're going to start here with Gino Smith, as it's always hard to sit a guy who just put up 30 fantasy points the week prior. However, just 2 weeks ago against the same 49ers defense that he's going to play this weekend, Gino put up a whopping 8 fantasy points. San Francisco allows the second fewest fantasy points to the quarterback position all season. And as of right now, this 49ers team is playing like they have a point to prove, which is scary. I don't want any part of this matchup for the Seahawks unless maybe Zach Charbonnet gets a lot of catches late in that game. However, I just don't want any part of the Seattle team, so I'm going to sit Geno Smith here, even though he's been on a bit of a hot stretch. But then how about his division foe, Matthew Stafford, another quarterback, of course, in the NFC West. But Matthew Stafford, I mean, he silenced a lot of doubters last week, and he threw for about 300 yards and 3 touchdowns against a very tough Cleveland Browns defense. However, as a Browns fan, it is worth note that the Browns didn't get a single sack last week. We were missing some guys in the secondary, and this week, Stafford goes against Baltimore, on the road in Baltimore, and this could be a different story, at least for his fantasy production. The Ravens defense has an NFL leading 47 sacks, so they generate pressure, and when the Rams have pressure on them, that is when they struggle the most. Not to mention, this Ravens team is rested. They're coming off of a bye week, and they're looking to clinch that number 1 seed in the AFC. I just think that, yes, both teams are trying to make the playoffs, but the Ravens are trying to get the number 1 seed. So they're playing for 2 different things. There's 2 different hungers and drives. But for fantasy, let's dial back here. For fantasy football, though, the Ravens have allowed the third fewest fantasy points to quarterbacks, and I don't think Stafford can go back-to-back weeks against the best 2 defenses and silence the doubters. So I would sit Matt Stafford this week in a win-and-get-in situation. But then how about his teammate, Cooper Kupp? Listen, I know I just talked about how great that Ravens defense is and how you should sit the quarterback of this team. In fantasy football, skill positions, their points add up a lot quicker than quarterbacks do. So that's my rationale here with starting Cooper Kupp, the guy in the thumbnail, of course. But on top of being an afterthought in this offense for a while now for fantasy teams, Cooper Kupp doesn't necessarily have a favorable matchup this weekend. I mean, the Ravens, they've allowed the 4th fewest points to wide receivers this season. And, I think they're 28th on Yahoo right now. However, Puka Nacua, he's going to be out for this game. He suffered an injury last week. And I'm going to take my chances that Cooper Kupp will get more touches and more involved in this offense than a guy like Tyler Higbee. So I expect Kyren Williams and Cooper Kupp to, call me crazy, I expect both of them to at least get 15 touches in this game. Who knows? Maybe with the Puka injury, this is the game that Cooper Kupp comes back to relevancy and he goes back to Triple Crown status right before the playoff run. But that is just a dream, obviously. But then for Gus Edwards at the running back position, Gus the Bus has been amazing this year. I mean, he's no doubt touchdown dependent, but he's still putting up points after points after points, touchdown after touchdown. But that's all started to slow down the past few weeks they've played. But most recently, in last game that they played in Week 12, just 2 weeks ago, Gus only had 8 carries, and he was outsnapped by both Keaton Mitchell and Justice Hill, the two backup running backs in this Ravens offense. The Rams provide a tough matchup for running backs. They're one of the best against the running back position in fantasy football, but especially when you add in the Keaton Mitchell, Justice Hill, but then also Lamar Jackson, it's just hard for me to want to start a guy like Gus Edwards, because if he doesn't score a touchdown, he's pretty much fantasy irrelevant. So avoid the start if you can, but I understand with injuries, Gus might, he might turn out to have an okay day. Well, if you handcuff Ezekiel Elliott for this long, for 13 weeks, you now have another starting running back for the playoff run. Ramondre hurt his ankle last week, and the report says he's going to be out for weeks. So this last month or so of the season, obviously the Patriots aren't good, but to me, it's going to be an audition for Ezekiel Elliott. It's going to be his tryout, so to speak, whether if it's for the Patriots next season or for another ball club. So I'm expecting to see a hungry Zeke, a Zeke that is going to get a lot of touches, and one that is going to try and extend his NFL career going into next year. To me, the Patriots also have a favorable schedule going forward for the running back position, and it starts this week with the Pittsburgh Steelers, who I think have the 12th worst against the run. So I would start Zeke Elliott this week. I think, whether if he scores or not, he's just going to get a lot of volume touches. So start Zeke in 2023. At the wide receiver position, we're going to start by saying, Trevor Lawrence hurt his ankle this past Monday, and he's going to be out for the next couple of weeks, most likely. I guess there's a fighter's chance or a shooter's chance that he does play this upcoming week, but I heavily doubt it, as Jacksonville doesn't necessarily need a win these next 2 weeks. But for the success of Jaguar players, you're going to be reliant on C.J. Beathard, and that's just not a recipe for success, right? But the intrigue here to start Calvin Ridley this week is the fact that, hey, Christian Kirk is out. He also got hurt this past Monday, and he might be out for some time. So on paper, Calvin Ridley should take over. It should be Evan Ingram and Calvin Ridley commanding the targets in his offense. However, Calvin Ridley plays the Browns this weekend, who Denzel Ward should be back, and they've also allowed the fewest fantasy points to wide receivers all season. Again, with Kirk out, it's actually going to play in, it's actually not going to go in the favor of Calvin Ridley, because the Browns, I'm going to imagine, and this is just me seeing it at home, I can imagine he's going to be facing double teams all day. The focus is going to be on him in the passing game. So to me, I would play it safe and play guys in better situations this weekend. But I get it. Maybe, you could see the upside of him getting a lot of catches with C.J. Beathard. I just don't want to rely on C.J. Beathard for fantasy playoffs. But then how about the number one overall pick in fantasy drafts, at least in the majority of them, Justin Jefferson. Jay Jettis returns to the field this week, but that doesn't mean to me he has to return to our starting lineups. He's great. Look, I know, obviously, but he's coming off of this injury, and I'm expecting a snap count for one, but for two, there's also the simple fact that he's just coming off of an injury. He's not going to be 100% on the football field. He's not going to be the Jay Jettis that we all knew and loved. So I know it's tempting, but I would sit him this week, and next week he should come back and save our seasons, at least for the playoff run. But now I do understand, if you're in a winning get-in situation, maybe if you're on that, right outside the playoffs, or you're right inside and you want to guarantee yourself a win, I don't hate rolling with your studs. I don't hate taking that risk and playing, at the end of the day, the number one overall pick in fantasy drafts. I would just play it safe if you can. If you have the depth, sit Justin Jefferson and start him next week. But then Rashied Rice, another solid outing last week. 15 fantasy points. They play the Bills this week, and that is really my rationale here, as it's always a shootout between the Chiefs and the Bills. So I'm excited. I'm excited for this weekend, and I'm expecting the same. And I think Rashied Rice can have a huge day, as both teams need that statement victory over a good opponent in the AFC. So I think Rice should eat, no pun intended, start him this weekend. At the tight end position, Cade Otton, 0 fantasy points last week. He had the same amount of fantasy points as you watching this video. So why are we starting him? Well, if you don't have one of the top 4 tight ends, I think they're all pretty interchangeable to me, because they're all touchdown dependent and they're all matchup dependent. So based on the great matchup this weekend against the Falcons, who have allowed the 4th most points to the tight end position, I think Cade Otton might find himself having a pretty decent day, at least a week that he can bounce back from. But, again, I like this play if you're in a bind, maybe. If you had Mark Andrews and he went down, Cade Otton, I think, could actually be a decent start this weekend against the Atlanta Falcons. But then finally, we'll finish off with a Pittsburgh Steeler and Pat Freiermuth. If Kenny Pickett was playing, I'd say, no doubt, start Pat Freiermuth this weekend. But that's not the case. Kenny Pickett is out with an injury, and Mitch Trubisky is a very solid backup. He might be one of the best backups in the NFL, but I just don't want to rely on Mitch Trubisky to provide fantasy-relevant options, especially in a week where it's a win and get in, and we need to win. We have to put our best foot forward. Not to mention, another reason I don't like it is because backup quarterbacks don't play well against the Patriots. Patriots, look, on paper, they're terrible, but their defense has actually been very solid this season. And against the tight end position, they've allowed the 5th fewest points all year. So to me, given the backup quarterback, given the tough matchup on the road, sit Pat Freiermuth on Thursday Night Football tonight. That's going to do it here for today's video. If you have any questions, who should I start, player A or player B? Drop that question in the comments below. And again, I'm just the same as you guys. I just have a platform. I'll talk to you guys about it, and we'll figure out what is the best start this weekend. Is it going with player 1 or player 2? Because that decision and that choice could be all the difference of you making or missing the playoffs. But without further ado, I'll see you guys next Tuesday for another great week of podcast. Next Tuesday, we have the NBA Top 10 Duos. So if you're interested, check that out. But until then, good luck to your real-life teams this weekend. Good luck to your fantasy teams. And, of course, help us on the road to 7K. But without further ado, get out of here.